So going back to flexibility and resilience, to become a CEO, what you need to have is then curiosity, interest in learning new things, interest in being at new places, interesting in moving into higher circles, higher altitudes of the business, while still having the ability to drop down to 5,000 feet. But if you spend too much time at 500 feet, you're dead. So you got to keep yourself up there. And I deal with executives all the time, and their blessing is when, oh God, I just hired a new CFO. I don't have to focus on that very much anymore. Now I can get up there. And the more they're up there, then they could be more successful at their company.
Welcome back to Fortunes of the Brave. I'm Lance Woodson, co-founder and CEO of Planet Wealth. And today, joining us is a seasoned connector and influential networker in the real estate industry, Matt Slepin. Matt currently leads at ZRG, finding top C-suite leaders to fill prominent roles across real estate landscapes. He's also the founder of Terra Search Partners and other top firms shaping leadership across the industry. Matt is no stranger to the podcast world. He also hosts ZRG's Leading Voices in Real Estate, a show that's been downloaded over 1 million times and features some of the most influential names in the industry. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here.
So you've interviewed countless world-class real estate leaders, and you've watched real estate go from family-run and local to national and institutional. Looking back, when would you try to pinpoint that shift?
I'm going to say it's the RTC days. So, and I worked at the RTC, so I was in the middle of a little bit of this. But in some ways, before the RTC, I think it was a business of the Cowboys entirely. And it was the wild, wild west. And there were family businesses. There were syndicators. Syndicators made their money because the tax system let it work, not because the economics really made it work.
Okay.
And then the S&L crisis happened, and there was a massive crash. It was the worst depression in the real estate business nationally. But out of that came a bunch of institutionalizing events. The two that come to mind immediately, one is securitization on the mortgage side. And so that really changed things because the whole CMBS business and institutional debt business got started out of the RTC. And the second thing is the REITs got started. And the REITs were really the first institutional upscale owner-operators that started, some of them as generalists, but got into specific sector-specific businesses, which is what they are today.
Okay.
And that really caused a huge change. There's still the Cowboys out there, but the Cowboys now play with the capital stack and the institutionalization that's happened on the other side of the business.
Gotcha. Matt, what do you think the next evolution in real estate will be then, with the industry being much larger today?
Yeah. So in some ways, the industry the assets didn't get larger because we have maybe the same number of office buildings, well, not so much on office, but, the same number of real estate assets. And then the question is what real estate assets are of institutional scale, but we could talk about what that means. So I don't think that changes, but I think the types of companies change and will continue to change and become more sophisticated. The driver for so much of this, including the stuff I talked about before, has been technology. We couldn't have done CMBS without technology. The REITs wouldn't really have gotten started without technology. The REITs enabled a shift from a company that might own 60 assets in separate limited partnerships to a company that had 60 different assets within one partnership or one entity. And to lead real estate from the sense of one balance sheet was the fundamental shift. But technology enabled that and then enabled their growth and increased sophistication. And that continues to drive how the business is going today. And of course, we don't know what AI is going to mean to all this in terms of changes in the behavior, the staffing, the organizations, and the experience.
No, that makes sense. So, the industry's getting bigger, but as industries grow, there's also new problems to solve. For example, the housing crisis in rural and urban areas and many more. What's your take on purpose and profit working for the greater good?
That's a complicated question. So we do a lot of work in the apartment business, and that's the business that I got my career start in. So I really care deeply about the apartment business. And I'll answer your question first from that perspective and then from other perspectives.
Okay.
And the apartment business largely serves lower and middle income people. There are some very wealthy people who live in apartments, they usually own their apartments, but the people in rentals are generally moderate, middle-income folks, working class, blue-collar folks, whatever the right words are for that. And the people who play in that business, be it workforce housing or subsidized affordable housing, they're serving customers, they're serving clients, and in the case of serving low-income people, they're serving people with, specific needs. Also, in the apartment business, the seniors housing is another subsector. Student housing is another subsector. And in each of them, you're serving people with different needs. Hospitality, caring about your residents, caring about your customer, that's inherent in the apartment business. But some do it with mission because there is a mission given the income levels, the neighborhood impact of different kinds of properties. And a lot of the companies that deal either in subsidized housing, either structures as for-profits or nonprofits, are very well aware of what their mission is in the business. So that's one side, one answer to a mission purpose question. Second answer to mission purpose is that our cities are our national treasures. And how do cities work? How are our cities successful? And the real estate business in so many ways is behind the success or not success of our urban areas. Third thing is climate change. Real estate in the built environment causes 40% of climate change or carbon emissions worldwide.
Oh, wow.
Our industry will be a big part of changing that and greening or making more sustainable the built environment, and that will be a big contributor towards helping to stabilize on climate change. So from all of those perspectives, our cities, climate change, the different types of people that we serve, the real estate industry really has a huge impact.
No, that was really insightful. So essentially, this is another sector where businesses serve their clients. And in doing that, it drives to being a larger part of the industry's identity moving forward. Maybe I'll just ask that. Do you see the coming future as things become more consolidated and growing larger, that taking the responsibility for driving the greater good, does that become a larger part of the industry's identity moving forward?
Not precisely. Let me use different words that fit it, and I'm still doing it through the lens of the apartment industry.
Okay.
And I love the word enlightened self-interest. A lot of folks out there, profit is the motivation. And they view the world that way. But to be good at making profits, you have enlightened self-interest about your customers, right? So the best operators may be cold from a standpoint of mission. I'm pretty hot on the standpoint of missions as personally, and half my clients and half my friends in the business kind of really care. But I actually don't care if they care, because enlightened self-interest takes over and is a big motivator. And then if we take enlightened self-interest and do it over a 20-year time horizon, then you start also to think of a different thing, which is reputation of an industry, so reputation protection and government regulation. And to the degree that we overstep our ability to make money off of a housing crisis, which is all about supply, it's not about rents, but to the ability that in moments we get as much as we possibly can, there will be regulations that push back against how the industry operates. So once again, enlightened self-interest and a longer-term enlightened self-interest gets us into the political realm on our reputation so that we get ahead of the curve from regulations trying to hurt our business. Hurt's the wrong word, but it really is.
No, that makes sense. I can see that. Matt, you've connected a lot of the right people for the right missions in your career. When you look at the companies that are actually thriving, do you think they're valuing their people more or their vision more?
Their people or their vision? Restate the question, because I'm curious about the distinction that you have in your mind between the two.
Yeah, you gave a really great explanation for how the work of the company is also tied to the success of the greater good, and how it's a symbiotic relationship of two entities serving their own self-interest but taking care of the other. Mm-hmm. In order to do that effectively, does the vision ever become more critical than the people, or does serving the people just validate the mission?
Yeah, I think they have to be aligned, and I think they're generally aligned, but I'll also answer the question a little bit differently than you're asking from my perspective, which is, have the people and the culture and the organization become more important to our successful companies over time? And so, I'm going to posit the answer to that is yes, and I'll give a bit of an explanation.
Okay.
So back in the timeline I described, when it was all the Cowboys, I'm sorry if I'm offending any people who ride horses out there, but in the olden days in the industry, before it was a bit more institutionalized, it was about the assets. So the value of a company or value of an enterprise was wholly determined. Well, if I add up this property and this property and this property and the value of each of them, that's my enterprise value. And some companies trade, particularly REITs, above or below the enterprise value of those assets. Over the time frame that I've been involved here, and I really believe deeply this, is the business platform, meaning the people, meaning the systems, meaning succession, meaning the capital structure, the decision structure, the technologies used in those companies, that those things together become what knits those companies together to enable them to be successful. So I call it the business platform, but the people structure and business platform of a company has increased in importance over time. So the ability for a real estate owner to pound their chest, say, hey, I got these big assets and they make me a lot of money and everything's cool, and treat the folks poorly, that's a really short-term game. So the best run companies, and the companies I believe with the best value, are those who mix both really great real estate decisions in terms of investments and doing transactions and doing deals with having a great company, great culture, great customer service, which shows up on the street, shows up in their rents. So excellence on both sides of the equation is really important for a real estate company today.
That's a really good answer. Tell me more. Let's go into more detail on both sides, really, because you're basically, in order to be successful, you got to put the right human capital into place.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're going to be driving the business. Instead of asking how they work together or how they contradict at times, I think what I'd really like to ask is, what are you seeing people doing that's driving success on both sides? So from the people perspective and the business and the frameworks and processes perspective.
Yeah. So I'm going to keep both of the things that you said on the side of business platform. Okay. So it's not on the side of, am I choosing the best property to buy or the best property to build? That's really important. And you're collecting a group of assets in a real estate company. And there's massive value created in how that's done, how that's structured, how that's financed, and how that's capitalized. So that all matters. Then, how do you get to great decisions on that side? That's the other side. It's your decision-making power, your ability to continue to make great decisions. But then most of the decisions actually, because vintage of when you bought a property matters as much as what you bought and how much you paid for it. It's the year you bought it in a lot. But the ability to operate that well, operate that successfully, operate that long-term, to have not financed, to over-leveraged it, the ability to make good decisions on leverage, the ability to have good capital stack behind your leverage so that when the economy goes in the wrong direction during your hold period, you can keep holding it instead of losing the asset, and that kills companies. So the decision-making process, the people who are there to manage those assets, people who have a business plan to buy an asset and know what to do with it to increase value, and increasing value has something to do with customer service, but it has a lot to do with a lot of things about knowing what to do with the real estate. Those are the things that are more perpetual, and they outlast the buildings you buy and sell. They are the company. They outlast the founder of the company, we hope. And when the founder leaves, there's a capital event. What's that look like? What's succession? What's long-term for a company or not? How does that play out? What does that mean? And that has changed over time because it's not kind of just about the genius person who created the entity. It's about either their family that continues it, the REIT that continues it, the leadership that continues it, and the structures that enable that continuation.
This is fascinating. I wasn't expecting you to say that it's changed over time. Do you mind going into more detail of how things are different today to effectively drive that success versus in the past?
Yeah, well, let's play with two things that might be the answers to that.
Okay.
One thing might be capital, and one thing might be technology. So first of all, the capital markets have changed over that same 30-year time horizon. Everything in the capital markets have changed. Mutual funds are now ETFs, right? Everything is different in the business, and the way that capital flows between places, both from an equity and a debt standpoint, is just a different industry across the economy, not just in real estate. But that change is a change over time. And then the technology that sits alongside that for every single aspect of the business, be it real estate, being any other business, technology has shifted so much, we don't know or necessarily understand its place in every component of the real estate job stack, right? Of all the things we do. But in accounting, in investor fundraising, which you guys do, in investor reporting, and to make that easy. I went to a client now 10 years ago, and they used to have to every month or every quarter or every year, both every month, every quarter, every year, they had to send out checks and K1s once a year, checks hopefully often, and they had 1,200 envelopes to lick. Licking them, man. This doesn't happen anymore, right? You push a button, and you don't even push a button because it's automatic. So that change is humongous. But on accounting, reporting, property management, development, construction, technology has changed the whole world that we live in. We all know this. But I think those are the two drivers.
Gotcha. That makes sense. When people expand their team, should they be looking at certain qualities or focusing on the output capacity?
I don't know what the word output capacity means. So I've never done a search in my placements of people for output capacity. Explain that, and then I'll play with it. But I could answer any question on that front.
So basically, we're a company like many that are looking to grow and are hiring and just expanding as quickly as we possibly can. And usually, we're hiring for specific skill sets or experience accomplishing specific tasks. But like you said, technology is changing, and you brought up AI, and skill sets are changing of what's actually needed versus what can now be commoditized through an app. And do you believe that businesses are better off hiring for specific qualities of a person or specific skill sets and the ability to create work product?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to talk about this again from the perspective of the real estate enterprise, not the technology enterprise, because I don't play in your space in that way. But real estate companies have people who handle different functions.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you my old answer, and then I'll give you a newish answer. And so those functions are very varied in the real estate universe, from accounting and finance on the kind of that side of the business to asset management. And asset management means a different thing in every single real estate company. It depends on what they're doing. Property management, to use a third-party property manager or your own property management. What does that mean? What's the development skill set? What's the acquisition skill set? I'm forgetting important people. What's the capital raising skill set? What's the executive skill set? And so we look at each of the functions in real estate, and I do believe you should hire someone who understands that function. They've been trained. Buy someone off of someone else's training program. And that really matters. But it gets more complicated today. And always when you'd hire someone with a skill set, of course you want someone with attitude and perspective, and they're going to fit, and all that stuff really matters.
100%.
Maybe the thing that matters the most right now is resilience and flexibility. And that's harder to find. And because you want someone who's going to be able to transition over the next 20-year generation, which is really different than what's happened in the past 20 years. And maybe that says that the prior experience in this space and the domain knowledge is a little bit less important than their ability to flex all the time. In the real estate business, I really think that people need to understand a discipline really well and become grounded in a discipline, be it property management, accounting, often asset management, acquisitions, and to grow to become a leader, because people always say, hey, who's going to be a CEO? Who's on that pathway? Still, the people on that pathway don't start as junior CEOs. They start as one of the functional areas, and they learn the crap out of that functional area, and they're great at it. And then they graduate from their functional area to being able to lead all functions, but they still have a wisdom from their function. So I think about that all the time. And I'm not going to change that thought, except the importance for flexibility and resilience right now is humongous. And one of the things that we're seeing in real estate companies is a lot of people of my generation have had a 40-year run at in an operating model. And that operating model is gone. And so people of my generation, after 40 years, it's hard to change. It's fun to think about the change, but can you be the one to implement that change? So we've done a lot of searches where generationally, say the CFO was really good in the day when you managed 30 different LLCs, but they didn't know how to manage a balance sheet. They didn't know how to manage a company. And we've seen this time and again. So going back to my story about the old days when it was a bunch of individual assets, all companies need to know how to operate as a company now, not just a bunch of real estate assets. So that's one of the changes we've seen a ton of CFOs of moderate-sized companies. And they've been doing it for 20, 30 years, getting out of that mindset into the mindset of the future of what capital structure looks like, the future of, hey, I have one balance sheet, or pretend I have one balance sheet. I'm going to manage this as a business. They don't have those skills. So that's another change. It's a generational change alongside of this issue of kind of flexibility and resilience and being able to have an open mind towards where things are going.
I'd really like to dig into that. So how are companies successfully navigating that transition from the prior asset-based skill set to the more current business-based skill set?
Yeah, I think somewhat painfully, and often I'm working with a client right now, and they want the executive I need to look for can span both ends of the spectrum. So they need to know, we own 100,000 units of apartments, and I want someone to manage a business for 100,000 going to 120,000 or 150,000. We're just going to get bigger and bigger. What's the skill set to do that? And is the skill set the same skill set I could walk a property and know exactly what's wrong with it? Those are like light years away skill sets. And I would argue that, and I said this before, hey, you come up from a skill set in your guts, you know how to operate a property. That may not matter anymore, right? Because that bigger skill set is the more elusive, harder one. And there's less companies that have been there. So you really have to find someone who you can grow into that role versus has been there, done that. Been there, done that hasn't been there for a lot of the executives or companies now.
Yeah, that's a pretty large disconnect. In speaking with entrepreneurs and real estate professionals that I come across, I think people definitely are more and more pressured or focused on growing into that more executive level role and less in the boots on the ground focus. And I think they feel pressured to give up the boots on the ground day to day. Is that just a natural byproduct of growth and momentum, or is that a disservice to the individuals?
Well, two things come to mind as you say this. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but one thing is a lot of young people start out and say, hey, I want to be a CEO one day. And how do I do CEO training? And I'll tell them come up through a discipline. That's my way to get there versus the GE way used to be, hey, go to a company, play in this sector, understand it well enough, play in that sector, do a tour through all the businesses, then you can grow up to be a CEO. And maybe that's truer than my version, but it doesn't happen very often in the commercial real estate space. So usually commercial real estate, you go up one of the silos in one of the parts of the business.
Gotcha.
So one question is, someone young with the aspiration to go there is one way to answer your question. And then the other one is that I'm with a company and we have grown. Can I grow with the company to become a leader of something larger? And can I learn to get out of the weeds? And I think every executive that I've dealt with struggles in some ways because we all love the weeds, right? We came from the weeds. I hope we came from the weeds.
We care so much about it, and it's so critical. You just want to,
right?
You can't not focus on it. But at the same time, you're 100% right that the truth is constantly learning and constantly growing is the only choice.
So going back to flexibility and resilience, to become a CEO, what you need to have is then curiosity, interest in learning new things, interest in being at new places, interesting in moving into higher circles, higher altitudes of the business, while still having the ability to drop down to 5,000 feet. But if you spend too much time at 500 feet, you're dead. So you got to keep yourself up there. And I deal with executives all the time, and their blessing is when, oh God, I just hired a new CFO. I don't have to focus on that very much anymore. Now I can get up there, and the more they're up there, then they could be more successful at their companies. So it's change in attention there, because still some of your ability is in diving down to the details. For me, like I dive into the details with my team, but it's for the purpose of mentoring and having them do it versus diving in details and doing that myself. I can't. Won't work anymore. Time doesn't enable it. And it's more fun to play higher, but playing higher is a different skill set.
That is true.
And a different skill set for which most are not able to do it. Shouldn't do it.
A new skill set. It's
That's right.
Yet another new thing to learn without question. Matt, at Planet Wealth, we have a lot of passionate people that are seeking capital to solve problems within their communities. Who are the leaders you've come across who didn't just succeed, but built something bigger than themselves?
Well, one go to my podcast, Leading Voices in Real Estate, because virtually every one of I interview largely leaders. It's not exclusively kind of CEO types, and often they're second generation CEOs, not someone who built the company, but they may take the company further. And all of the folks, I'm going to think they're as humble as I am, so I don't know if they are or not, but I think all the folks are surprised when they find themselves, oh my God, I'm running an 80,000 unit apartment company. I'm running I was with the co-heads of the Blackstone industrial platform, and delightful, wonderful conversation a couple of weeks ago. And maybe they always expected to be, big shots, but they aren't. And we're all humbled to be able to do that. So that's an interesting thing. The folks who kind of created something from nothing, that's a question, and maybe the question that you're asking. And on the podcast, we've had a bunch of them, and a bunch of them are my clients. And I'll name a couple of them. One was not on the podcast, Sister Lillian Murphy. So she was the 35-year executive of Mercy Housing, which is the largest housing nonprofit in the country. I knew Sister Lillian fairly well. I think she started when they had 3 or 4 properties, I think. And she grew it to 20,000 units, give or take. She was an executive. She was a sister. She's a nun. She was a nun. She's unfortunately passed. But she created something from nothing. And she had the word I like to use, which is relentless. And maybe my reason for picking her first is I'm smiling because it's funny to think of a nun and being relentless as a business person and a CEO. But she was a tough one. And she held no prisoners and she had a mission, because that was what drives one to remain a nun. But it was to accomplish the mission. She had to build a company, and she had to build a great company. So what's that look like? Also, again, I'm thinking of low-income housing. This guy named Daryl Carter, and he runs a company called Avaneth, which is a large owner of low-income housing. And he did start that company from scratch after having started 2 mortgage companies from scratch and selling those mortgage companies. And he had lots of success and lots of setbacks. And then late 50s or mid 50s or something like that, he started Avaneth. It's a really, really successful company, and it's tireless in its growth. I could give more examples, and so many of these folks have been on my show, but hearing them tell their stories, they don't give up. They're relentless. They keep going. They do have a mission. The mission often is not to get rich. And I think about all the time, okay, my goal in life is to get rich. I don't think there's a lot of meaning in that. That's not me. I didn't say what I just said.
Right, no, but that won't get you there.
I don't think so. It does for some people. And, once I interviewed a guy for a job with Lincoln Property Company, and we were interviewing people, and he said, I'm going to get rich from this job. And when he said that, like, this is something that makes me not comfortable. So I'm not happy there when he says that, except I believed him. And he did. So the drive for money, for some people, that relentless drive with that goal is just fine and works. But usually it's a goal. I'm going to start a great company. The co-founder of Camden Properties, one of the kind of amazing apartment REITs, was on the show early in the show career. And they've been in the business for 20 years, but they wanted to create the best company in the sector. And their goal was less their residents than their employees in terms of how they thought of it. I'm going to create the best company to work for, and that's going to create the best company for people to be residents at. So all these stories are interesting and all different.
You mentioned being relentless and also having a mission. What practical advice do you want to give to founders and teams so that they can stay on mission while managing that tension between purpose and profit?
The thing that I think of is to be able to articulate what your goal is for this, and then to say that, and to have a vision that can be accomplished. And so I do very strongly believe in focus. And in the tech business, sometimes people are surprised by the focus they get. They start with one thing and they're going to make it successful, and then it morphs into something that really is successful. Then they do it again. So those skills I don't understand. Real estate's a more linear business. But to have a focus in the area of real estate, the last guests on the podcast were two guys who started a real estate company to invest in secondary and tertiary markets in the Western states, a company called Groseda Partners.
Okay.
And they then, let's go implement that. And the minute you have a purpose and a guide, here's my business model, let's go get them. And then you focus relentlessly and hard work to get there. You have to have some hunger and ambition along with those are all words that fit in there. But I think you do have to have an idea that's executable that you stick with. It may morph, it will morph, theirs morphed, but that idea, the Camden guys, we're going to invest in apartments and we're going to be the best company to work for. And then how do we accomplish that? Because I know how to accomplish the best company to work for. I don't know how to accomplish being the biggest apartment. That wasn't their goal anyhow. So, but they did accomplish that goal of being the best place to work. And, they've been in Fortune best places to work, 17 of the last 17 years or something. Wow. Once they started. That is not easy. But that was their mission, and that mission accomplished a lot of dough along the way.
That's impressive. You've spoken with hundreds of leaders on Leading Voices. When you think back, what's one lesson that stayed with you about success and leadership?
I may have already said it in terms of kind of vision, focus, being good people. Now everyone claims to be good people. Not everyone is good people, but I'd say 80% of the folks I met with, I'm surprised by how good people they were or they felt to me. Maybe they're playing up to me. I'm a podcast host. Maybe they're not so nice to their folks, except for most of the people who I have connected with. These companies are great places to work. They're good people to work with. There are assholes in our business, and business is known for that, but I don't think business is that. I don't think that has a good long-term plan. It certainly doesn't have a lot of happiness in it.
No, the way I see it is money is transferred when value is created. And if you're not creating value for other people, you're not going to be making money in business either way.
Yeah. Now, and you can, right? Because there are famous stories of people in our industry and others who were just, relentless creeps. But I haven't worked with many of them, thank God. And I'd say equal, if not equal, much better chances that people are pretty good folks.
For somebody that's just getting started, whether it's real estate or business, since we've been talking about both, what mindset would you tell them to bring to the table?
So the one thing I think about, slightly different than mindset, but it fits this, is find the place within the business that you want to be involved with that works for who you are. So if you're going to spend the first 10 years or first 20 years of your career, let's play this out. Careers have two phases. I'm making this up, so there's no book about this.
Let's run with it.
Okay, first 20 years as you wander through the wilderness, you find the function within the business that fits you. Took me years, by the way. So I'm really empathetic to this. I didn't start, okay, I'm going to be a developer and I'm great at it and I'm just going to learn the heck how to develop. It didn't work for me. I became a recruiter somehow. But maybe you start in the development role and you go, I'm not really one of them. And then you go, okay, let me try asset management or let me try transactions because I like the rapidity of deals. And I'm not really that. You know what? I love asset management. I love working on assets. Okay, that takes 6 years to find the right role and then dig into that role. Dig into that role like heck. Don't change industries when you get frustrated. Change roles within your industry to a role that you like.
That's good advice.
People early in their career go, I thought in real estate because I wandered through the real estate desert trying to find the role for me, and I kept failing, actually. So I didn't love my industry. And then I found the role I loved, and I loved my industry because I got to play a really cool role in the industry that I now love. So stick with it. Find the place that you exist. Find the level of your success. Not everyone's going to be a CEO. Not everyone's going to, make $1 million or whatever those judgments are. But you can find a whole lot of happiness at your right level in your right function for a long term in the business, and you can love it.
That's good. Matt, usually at the end of my show, I like to ask my guests to share something our audience may not know or might be surprised to hear, or just something that might be entertaining. What would you like to share with our guests today about yourself?
That's fair deal. So I'll share two things. One, I'm one of the luckiest guys alive because I married the right woman. And
Nice.
She's in the business of real estate. And I had Diane and I like to bicker. We're one of those bickering couples.
Okay.
And we push each other. And she pushed me really hard. And we've had a partnership marriage. And it's been wonderful. So I'm a really lucky guy. That's thought number one. Thought number two is I play music. And I had the blessing about 6 years ago with a good friend of mine in Sonoma County, California. And he owns a bagel shop. And he had not fessed up to me that he has a Tuesday afternoon jam at his bagel shop. And he calls it Stu's Day. His name is Stuart. Grateful Dead fans like to combine words into things. So that's how Stu's Days.
Interesting.
Anyhow.
Okay.
But 10 of us or 5 of us get together every Tuesday afternoon and do 2.5 hours of baby boomer guitar jamming. And that's
fantastic.
One of the most delightful things out there.
Nice. Matt, I appreciate you being on the show. Folks, Matt's website, social media, and resources will be included in the show notes. Thank you so much for sharing your insights today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on the show. This was really fun.
It was. Thank you. Did this episode help you tackle a mindset shift? Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Your feedback can provide actionable solutions to others seeking access to opportunity.